Welcome everybody to this amazing session that we've got lined up, which is part of a free and radical creative online series for radical pioneers. And in this session is titled How to Create Worlds from Scratch. And with the wonderful Sitraka, Rakotoniaina, I'm sure you'll be able to pronounce that better. And then we've got Guilia and Guilia Tomasello. Honestly, sincere apologies, I'm sure I've butchered both of your names. I just really want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded. And if anybody wants to use the live transcript, you can just see it at the bottom control panel. Just to introduce myself, my name is Majid. And a visual description, I am wearing a navy t-shirt, a beige cap facing forward with a bit of a grizzly beard. And yes, I'm one of the non-executive directors at Tory Moon, and as well as founder and director of Union of Justice, and amongst lots of other things. And before we kick things off, I have got something very, very exciting. I'm sure some of you already know about it, but just in case you don't, you're going to love it. So,
already loving it. We are loving it already.
Lele, you need to give me access to share my screen. Can you just make me co-host, please? There we go. So guys, we are giving away a shit ton of money, basically. So it's a real amazing opportunity to get funded to make any sort of creative project that's going to actually feature in the festival Tour de Moon. Literally, you've got options from, you can create an immersive film. We're giving up to £25,000 each. Maybe, maybe immersive films is not for you and you want to just basically perform. We've got budgets for that. You can write a short play. Heck, you can even DJ if you want. And if writing's more your style, you can take part in actually contributing to the zine. Maybe you actually want to be the creative editor for the zine. That option is also available. But it is really, really inclusive. We want as many people to get involved. And you know what? Maybe you're thinking, none of this is not necessarily might not be for me, but I know exactly who this could be for. Feel free to share it amongst your friends. And the best website to go on is tourdemoon.apply, and you'll see everything there. Right, where was I? So yes, guys, and I am now going to hand it over to our two amazing guests. And if I can just also ask them to visually introduce themselves as well as verbally, just kind of give you a short description of your work, your experience, and what your relation is to Tour de Moon, if you have got relation to Tour de Moon, and more importantly, just how we can all kind of create that world from scratch. Over to you, Sitraka.
Hello. So my name is Sitraka Rakotoniaina. I wear a blue hoodie and I have a cat that is playing with my computer, so I'm trying to move it out of the way. And I'm also involved within Tour de Moon. I've been one of the programmers. I'm currently one of the curator for the Moon Sport strand of the festival. And I will be talking about part of my sort of practice or projects, an ongoing project that uses world building as one of his kind of like foundation, and hopefully this will be of interest for some of you, and hopefully you'll get like some aspects would be relevant. So thanks for inviting me. Can I share my screen? Oh yeah, I have.
Yes, you should be able to.
Yeah, here we go. So as I said, first off, thank you very much for inviting me and to be part of this, because it's always a privilege to be able to talk about my personal practice to other people. Thank you very much for that. So just a general kind of description as well. I'm an artist and designer, and I'm based in London. And the plan, I mean, the idea is to give a perspective, or at least my perspective, on world building, how I've been approaching it, the tools and sort of method that I've been using over the past few years as part of my practice, but also perhaps the context I'm doing this in, and eventually, if I get to that, what I'm hoping to achieve. Although what I'm hoping to achieve is still up for grab, to be honest. So I'm doing, as I said, world building as part of Very, Very Far Away, this project called Very, Very Far Away. So a lot of it is going to be discussed through the lens of that particular project. So I started world building first as a way of imagining futures beyond the kind of usual, almost traditional, seemingly kind of homogeneous popular narrative constructs that are often described through top-down strategies and end up informing kind of mental images and feel for a world I may not even project myself into, or don't even feel like don't even feel like a narrative I'm part of, or I'm necessarily very concerned with, to the extent that it may sometimes create some space or new spaces for fear and desperation to emerge, like, I don't know, the fear of being left behind or not being heard and disappearing in silence. So conversely to a sort of top-down approach with the potential consequences I just described, the main thing for me is to try to imagine a world that would rather emerge from an entanglement of local narratives. And my approach so far has been to start by looking at, or perhaps reimagining, part of the built environments, the artifacts, the objects that we are producing, the resulting rituals that come from their use, and also the kind of inherent meanings that these things purposely or inadvertently carry around. Thus, this idea of crafting narratives using an arrangement of things meticulously put together to create new meanings. So coming from a design background, I find that this is perhaps one of the most interesting functions of design is the creation of meaning. And this is, and with this particular thing in mind, this is where world building becomes the kind of playful activity of trying to imagine the things that embody the world within which they exist. This is something that we often refer to, and that by we I'm saying me, my collaborators and I actually, we refer to as reverse archaeology, and to caricature what the idea of the kind of archaeologist, or what does the archaeologist do? It is the kind of person that finds bits and pieces, like the clues of a puzzle, that enables them to extrapolate on worlds and civilizations' rituals from distant times. And here I'm sort of interested in the same idea, but applied to future or alternative spaces and times, to imagine what we often end up calling, again, my collaborators and I, to imagine a set of familiar unknowns. And this is something that isn't necessarily new. This is like an extract of a documentary called The Eye of Tomorrow that's been directed by J.K. Raymond Millet in 1947. And basically it's a documentary about the early days of French television. And part of the documentary, which is a rather serious documentary, there's this kind of futuring exercise where the director started imagining what would happen if TV set could be, pocket size. And so obviously from just this particular prompt, which is a kind of like almost a silly idea at the time, they're starting creating or imagining new rituals, new interactions and relationship with technology. So again, as I said, like local narrative, like starting from the small and peculiar, and see how these look within the broader picture. And again, this was a particular, it was about the glorious beginning of French television, but this particular part was a little bit silly. Like, it was like coming as a sort of like comic relief as well. So it was very kind of like this a playful play on this idea of pocket-sized televisions. And the other thing that is quite interesting is like when I discovered this video, obviously there were no Teslas out there on the street, and you can see that this kind of like silly exercise led to quite interesting type of anticipations. And obviously one of the main thing of this particular video with the kind of TV within the car is the fact that if you get distracted too much, you get car accidents. So it's like kind of anticipating on the kind of like car accidents that you could have looking at a screen, etc. Another kind of video that I wanted to share as well is more of a kind of top-down approach, so kind of the opposite way, which is the Home of the Future, year 1999 AD, that's been commissioned by Philippe Ford Corporation in 1967, and it's kind of imagining. Basically, it's kind of imagining this particular extract is about like the kitchen of the future, and it's a kind of trying to imagine what technology would bring and what could technology do, but not necessarily looking into the new relationship that we may entertain with the technology, or eventually how this would shape certain type of behavior. So interestingly, what they do here is trying to predict things, but actually what they provide us with is a time capsule with the value of the time, and they kind of crystallize a sort of like American suburban utopia of the time powered by computers. And obviously you've got the mom here is the one who's making food. It's lunch or dinner, and she's using a computer to actually think about menus. What's actually the husband is actually working and only wants to eat cheeseburger, and the kid is actually just finishing his homework, etc., etc. So anyway, in this case, the thing that I find quite interesting is like was perhaps they were trying to predict the year 1999. Imagining what the future could be is more a kind of strategy to highlight current attitudes and prejudices. And to refer back to this kind of idea of crafting narrative, and this idea that things we produce promote certain ideals and meanings. And by things, I don't necessarily mean like single object, but perhaps constellation of things, or rituals and services as well are part of that. And constellation of things that by their sort of like interrelations may create some circumstances reinforcing certain narratives or certain values. And an example that I like to give is the example of how the kind of like city of Los Angeles grew around the car, the narrative of the car as this vision of the future. So at the end, or towards the end of the 19th century, you've got the transcontinental railway that enabled this kind of like expansion of Los Angeles, and Los Angeles was being sold as this idea of luxurious future. And at the time, so early 20th century, bizarrely, the kind of public transportation system of Los Angeles actually enabled the city to expand and become a little bit of a sprawl. But at the time, the idea of what kind of incarnated the future was the car and the kind of like private ownership of cars. And this actually led to I don't know if you've seen this amazing documentary, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is because part of it is actually talking a little bit about that. This idea that then this kind of like public transportation system got dismantled because it got privatized, notably by GM, and they started constructing a lot of highways, and eventually this proposal of monorail in 1954 got rejected, and mass transit was something of the past. But the thing is, when you start thinking about car and the infrastructures around the car, or around the cars, and this idea of the car, it's not only the repercussion aren't necessarily only, or the ramifications not necessarily to the car owners or the way you drive, etc. But it also has an impact on the urban planning, but also the architecture itself, like the idea of being able to do everything from your car, like being able to drive around and see what's inside the buildings, etc., etc. So obviously there's other factors at play as well, but this is kind of like this idea of cars, the future trickled down in many different ways and very diverse, and to the point that without the haze of nostalgia, if you would look at the idea of I don't know, going to the cinema within your car seems completely absurd, but as the idea, this incarnation of narratives of the future. And then fast forward to today, and we're in a situation where we're completely backwards, because obviously the city's been designed to be experienced by car. And in this image is an interesting one. It's like ABC7 in 2018, saying that this is the worst, LA has the worst traffic in the world for the 60th straight. I don't think they necessarily looked beyond the United States, but it's an interesting idea in any case. And despite the sort of strategy of increasing road capacity continuously failing, the same car-centric narrative has as being somewhat still futuristic in some ways, kind of lead to this company, the Boring Company, but I think it's an Elon Musk company. Again, I don't know if you heard about it, but the idea of this company is to create this sort of network of 3D network of tunnels under LA. So the traffic jam won't be in 2D anymore. It will be in 3D as well. And coming back to design as a method for the creation of meaning, there are two modes that I'm usually interested in. And we saw with the Boring Company, for instance, it's more design as process. The idea that design is kind of like as a kind of enhancement or continuation, something that reinforces the status quo and the pre-existing. And when I'm talking about crafting narratives, I'm more on the side of like using design as a medium, imagining new relationship to things to foster potentially new possibilities, even if it means getting rid of what existed before. And so kind of world building as this practice of kind of playfully crafting narratives is for me an effective strategy for the elaboration of new imaginations and new cultural fiction. And this is kind of like what we try to sort of explore with this project that I mentioned earlier, very, very far away, that we initiated back in 2015 with Andrew Friend. And you can find more information on the website, but I'm just going to give you a couple words just to explain what it is. So it is a public-facing research project where our main interest is to partner with groups and individuals and public and or private institutions to find creative ways to entertain a diversity of imagination when attempting to reimagine futures on Earth and beyond. And we use design, as I said, as an exploratory tool to examine and critique dominant socio-technical imaginaries, explore new relationship between people and technology, and eventually prototype new narratives. And the way we've been doing it so far is through a series of workshops and co-inquiries that are about world building. And we've been organizing and evolving these kind of co-inquiries over the past 6-7 years by now. So the idea is to use the kind of collective experience to imagine juxtapose local narratives, and the idea is not necessarily to elaborate very complex stories, but imagining with amazing script and etc., but rather kind of trivial description of situation or set of circumstances. So the method we've been using through the years, I mean, this is the basic skeleton. But, I mean, we may have shaped it in different ways, like now it might be concentric circles, before it was squares and etc. But basically what it is it's a kind of like, it's all based on a simple way of timelining and mapping. So what you have here is a kind of timeline going from whenever in the past to whenever in the future. The idea of going whenever in the past is like, perhaps there are some past patterns that could be used to anticipate on future patterns. But the difference of a linear time is the fact that we also have this y-axis, which is going from utopia to dystopia, which is this idea of like taking a posture, taking a stance with regard to the information that we're going to put on the timeline. So for instance, in the case of Los Angeles and cars, like maybe in the early 20th century, cars were like some sort of like utopian, and actually towards like the middle, towards now, like it's more of a dystopia, etc., etc. I mean, that's the gist of it. And these narratives are arranged around given prompts, situations, and technological landscapes, where the aim is to kind of identify and map as much information as possible about the stakeholders, their motivations, and how these stakeholders and motivations may change depending on the location or context, perhaps. And obviously, we try to imagine how these evolve through time, since in the timeline, but what the ramification could have depending on context means that sometimes there's multiple outputs that may happen at the same time. So we kind of map all these things at once on the same kind of layered on the same timeline. And this is what we end up with often. We end up with this kind of like the timeline that start looking like a tube map. So nothing necessarily very linear and nothing necessarily very easy to understand or to follow. It's a kind of like sort of diagram for, I don't know, the choose your own adventure book type of stuff. And as we build these kind of small local narratives juxtaposed next to each other, we start implicitly cross-referencing ideas that leads to other ideas. And this is often at the intersection of these ideas that we start seeing a world emerge with a certain character and feel, and but mostly shaped through, I don't know, bizarre but also wonderful kind of inventions, machines, objects, services, rituals, etc., etc. And also it's often more varied than perhaps what our original assumption about this particular situation would have been when we started the co-inquiry. And this is what we left with once the co-inquiry is done. We kind of left with something that is very difficult to read, kind of picture of complex sets of situations crossing each other. So not necessarily the easiest thing to archive, and even looking at this image, like even a few weeks later, it becomes quite difficult to remember what these things about. So we started designing and recording these worlds through short fictions, dialogues, fictional ads, PSAs, and other kind of designed interventions that embody the best, the sort of character and spirit of the world we ended up creating and exploring. And we also used a variety of approaches. We sort of experimenting with the kind of like wide range of activities. We did like build some cardboard set to shoot films in them. We created special devices for kids to record their special stories. We also made sort of like multiplayer instruments. In this particular case, this is sort of a like a 9-player analog synthesizer connected to a 3-way speaker in the center. So people would be sitting around, like the ritual would be people would be sitting around playing the synthesizer and at the same time sort of like telling stories. We've also used live action role playing, trying to stage some future or weird or alternative weird a protest, for instance. And similarly, we did the same thing by doing live broadcast radio, where the visitor were kind of like invited to improvise conversation. And we had also a band that would in real time sort of score these dialogues and conversations, etc. And something that I haven't necessarily talked about, but we use space exploration and deep time horizon as narrative devices, meaning that the prompts we use for these different groups starts by kind of positioning them in some situation in outer space. And interestingly, when we start slightly steering away from focusing on only on technical considerations of living in outer space, we often end up discussing things that may relate more to kind of human practices and their precedents. And we try to leverage these playful imaginations that emerge from this consideration as a way of depicting not only alternatives and potentials, but also things that may raise some concern currently or in the near future. So more often than not, traveling very, very far away in spaces and times is never about prediction, but rather it enables us to collectively think critically and reflect on the present status quo. And in some way, the way we create analog mission simulation to simulate Mars or the moon here on Earth, we kind of use outer space as our simulation for thought experiments, or simulate different systems or way of doing things. And one last thing, so the outcomes, whether it is a podcast or a cultural event or a performance or a series of objects, etc., are for me sort of ways of archiving ideas. Like we go to these worlds that we created and bring back something that we found was meaningful. And at the same time, we use these outcomes as mediums of dissemination of these ideas in contexts that are beyond necessarily the art or the kind of playful workshop that we're giving. And this sort of archiving actually enabled us to write papers, organize seminars around ideas and conversation that emerge from these worlds. So these worlds may be fictional, but the outcome and the discussion, the conversation are manifested in a very tangible way. And so that's pretty much it for now. And I hope I feel like I'm running through things, etc. But I hope I've been very clear. If you're looking for more sort of information, you can go check these websites. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And just so much to unpack, and in all honesty, Sitraka. So thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll be going into some Q&A shortly, but I really just want to give a very warm welcome and introduce Guilia Tomasello. I hope I said that better this time. Guilia. So Guilia, thank you so much for joining us. Massive warm welcome. If you can introduce yourself and let people know about your practice, and yeah, just share with us. We'd be more than happy to have you. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I Sitraka as well. I'm Guilia Tomasello. I'm an interaction designer. I'm Italian. At the moment, indeed, I just came back from Berlin, and I'm like long hair with fringe, brunette color and wearing like a dress with stripes, blue and white. So today I'm gonna guide you through my work, which is been like a mix of working with biohacking, but also wearable technology in the field of female intimate care. Can you just tell me if you can see it in a bigger screen in case?
Yes, we can see it all clearly. Oh, no,
I'm just,
no. Yeah, if you
yeah,
just,
sorry. Now I'm doing it again because I'm sharing the sound. Okay,
no, all good.
thank you. So when I talk about my work, I like to start with a quote from Simone de Beauvoir in her book, The Second Sex, which says, "That's me. I'm a woman, I have a body, and my body is a social construction rather than a naturally given datum." And with this quote, Simone de Beauvoir really wanted to like show how actually the woman, especially the female body, is perceived from the society. A female body that gives birth, and a female body that at the same time has to be at the expectation of the society. And this is actually something that in my work is coming very constantly, and especially in the boundary between how actually technology can be applied in our daily life. So referring about female intimate care or female movements, I started my research from the women in Boston in 1970s, where they were meeting every week to really talk about topics that at the time, and we can say even now, were considered taboos. So from menstruation, giving birth, sexual pleasure. And they then released this book called Our Bodies, Ourselves, where they were like giving instruction or somehow education and awareness and experiences from other people on how to really take care of your own body. So from this really approach on the stigmatizing taboos towards like also an open source somehow knowledge, I then started to practice my work as well by starting in a biohack space. So this was the biohack lab in London in Acne Week, which is not there anymore. And just to go back, I actually started as a product designer in Milano, and then I moved to Eindhoven, where I did a master in social design, and then I ended up in London at the master in material futures at St. Martin's. And that is where I really like dived into this world of living organisms, which really helped me to see the world in a different way. And we talk about in 2014, 15. So in here at the lab, which is really a tiny, tiny room, I really started to talk about multidisciplinary work, because I was with engineers or with scientists, and I was just a designer that in the evening I was there trying to like grow bacteria and make something happening. But why I was really interested in working with living organism was mainly about this concept of citizen science, where everyone that is an amateur or that just want to be a participant in this world of knowledge and science actually now can do it very easily. And especially like approaching like from a DIY, which is do-it-yourself approach, you can really actually do what you want. And in this case, I wanted to really try to grow a second conductive skin which could interact with ourselves. But why I became very interested in working with bacteria is because actually when I started to do this research in 2015, studies were saying that the 90% of our microbiome or of our skin and our body was made from microorganisms such as fungi, bacteria, and only the 10% of human cells. And by now they actually changed this number in 50-50. So we could argue that we are maybe 50% made of microorganisms and 50% of human cell. But this you can like figure it out when, for example, you say, I feel something coming from my gut as a sort of instinct that you're like driving your thoughts. And this is because actually in the gut is where you have the majorities of the bacteria or the different bacteria that makes you different from me and different from other people. So now I'm going to give you sometimes some short videos that are coming from my work. And in this case, it's from a documentary called Girl Biophilia, which talks about skin microflora.
I know very little about skin microflora.
So the relationship between microorganisms and the human body is extremely complex. Evolutionarily speaking, microorganisms are the reason why we could evolve. Their intricate interaction has enabled multicellular organisms to thrive. So to this day, we sort of draw the line between this intricate relationship between them being part of us and them being separate from us. So the only way that I could describe the relationship between microorganisms and humans is probably by saying it's very tight.
And how I started to grow bacteria at the beginning was not really at the biohack space in London, but was in my room. So I started to really domesticate biotechnology. And that was my way as a master's student to really understand what is the limit between growing something that actually is already part of my body, but growing externally so I can physically and visually see what it is, this like invisible world that is constantly in symbiotic relationship with myself and that is constantly part of me. And specifically, I was swapping different parts of my bodies and growing them with textiles or with fibers because I wanted to really see where they were growing, how. And as you can see, most of them were probably molding, were just growing wrongly. And so the person that you saw before in the video was actually the scientist guiding me in how to grow this microorganism, because most of the time probably they were just sick, so I had to kill them. So you're really, again, also creating this nurturing process with your material that is not anymore just a piece of wood that you take and chop in the lab, but is actually something that you're growing. So what we can say is that recently, like, we are going towards accepting the fact that do-it-yourself, also do-it-yourself biology and biotechnology is becoming the challenge that also as designer we can think on how to shape the world or how to create new worlds. And in my case, I wanted to understand, so what if we really take every makeup or every cream, everything that we are using in everyday life, and we see what is behind? What if we, like, behind these products, there are actually bacteria or microorganisms? So my question was, what if we would wear bacteria to empower women, to empower female bodies? And in 2016, I graduated from the Master in Material Futures with this project called Future FLORA. And Future FLORA is a kit designed for female to treat and prevent from vaginal infection. So what you will do, you will have a kit at home that will allow you to grow bacteria, healthy bacteria that will replace not healthy vaginal flora and just have an healthy microflora in your body. Why? Because like the 75% of women all over the world can suffer of vaginal infection at least once per year, which is a huge number. And at the same time, my question was like, if one day we will have an incubator at home, if we will know that not all the bacteria are harming us, even though now talking in a pandemic situation is very difficult, what if just we can grow bacteria for ourselves so that we can be the first, let's say, person to take care of our own bodies and then going maybe to the doctor or for experts with a different knowledge and different awareness. So I'm just going to give you a short introduction of this project, how it looks like, and also like, again, part of this documentary of girl biophilia.
Or as a woman in this society, speaking about your intimate health is definitely frowned upon. So when you hear a female talking about it, you're like, wow, well, she's brave, she can talk about that. And they look at you funny, but it could happen to you, it could happen to your sister, it could happen to anyone.
I feel like if you're a woman who needs to speak about her intimate health to a professional, it's always a bit of a difficult situation where you have to awkwardly go into a waiting room full of sort of Justin Bieber lookalikes.
It's definitely a taboo. I think in general women tend to keep this problem inside. I've never done this with a guy. I wouldn't feel comfortable, and I think he wouldn't be comfortable. It's not sexy, so yeah.
Hi, I'm Giulia Tomasello, and I'm the designer of the project Future FLORA.
Future FLORA is a kit designed for women where the woman can make her own sanitary pad with bacteria and wear it in the underwear to treat and prevent candida infection.
A candida infection is this specific scenario where we have an imbalance in.
So you can find more of this documentary online, but what I wanted to take out from this is to actually show you that when especially you're working towards a speculative scenario, so when you're basing a project that maybe looks out at the future and maybe just in 10, 50 years can actually happen, innovation takes time. So you really need to be patient and maybe understand that if now something cannot really be understood, then something it will be. So at the time when I graduated in 2016, even from Santa St. Martin's, it didn't went very well, even though immediately after was on the zine as a kind of provocative project that a student wanted to grow bacteria at home. And just 2 years after, it received a prize called STARTS Prize from Ars Electronica, which is an honor in technology, in science, and social for the arts. So it really proved that if actually at the time in 2016, not yet was understood on talking about biohacking and female taboos, just later 2 years, like with also the movement of the #MeToo and just with more a new wave, let's say, of feminism, which we are still part of, this project became really something that why not in a future scenario can happen. So Future FLORA became much more rather a piece of conversation that I used to really introduce this type of different topics, from the stigmatizing taboo, using the technology at home, and really creating these scenarios. So what are we talking about? Of course, if you think about the typical infection or the problems that women have, is something that you see at like on the top, so from urinary infection, maybe sexual transmitted disease, but honestly, like in the below area is what there is much more happening. So another like interesting part of this kit of Future FLORA is that if, for example, in the zine you can see many comments that are very critical or very misogynist. Unfortunately, we have to say this. At the same time, many women, many females were asking to buy the kit or to understand where they can be the trial kit, because actually it's something very that is happening every day. So as a designer, I decided to step down, let's say, from the speculative scenario and to really work into something that can be actually happening now. And now I'm one of the co-founders of this studio called Alma, where we co-create tools to create a cultural change in female intimate care. So mainly what we do now is to really work directly with women. So in the team, the co-founders, we are me as a designer, a medical anthropologist, and 2 scientists, where we really like divide ourselves in developing technology that is supported by educational or participatory methodology. And in this case, we work with women like all over the world. We are running workshops, which before pandemic were actually live, to really understand what does it mean to talk about female bodies in Rio de Janeiro or in Malaysia or in Thailand and in Europe. Like, what are the differences? And I will show you just a very little documentary which are part of those workshops.
What is about the tile is still a very basic
an opportunity to help young women learn how to listen to their bodies. I certainly didn't learn it. I've learnt it as I got older. So instead of the pains and the change in the body being something we resist, it's more that we embrace it. So my breasts are hurting. Well, that's normal, you know, and just allow that.
But I do have data concern. Like as it is, if it's stored somewhere safe and it's only used for research purposes, it's fine.
This is very cultured.
Within the Muslim community, is there any women speaking out against it right now?
Of course,
yes.
they have, but it's very difficult because it's culture.
No. I don't mind wearing the technology, especially when it comes to healthcare. And
So from those workshops that we have been running all over the world, at this moment now we probably did 13, which only 9 were in presence because before we got stuck. But the point was really to understand, like, if there is this layer of taboo that is surrounding like everyone, and then it really goes across the globe, how at the same time are the different layers of cultural background, religion, and language that are really shaping these taboos, and how maybe technology or low technology at the same time, so tools can help people to have a different perception with these topics. So we are writing a book at this point, at this moment, where we are really trying to define this participatory methodology and approach that we use to then co-design products. And one of the products somehow, or the project that we are working on at the moment, it's called Alma Atlas, which is an online community that ideally will be open source, like a Wikipedia, a sort of place where everyone anonymously could share about their own experiences, but that across, let's say, if somebody in Taiwan is using a specific herbs to treat their urinary infection, what if in South America somebody with the same plant can use it? So to really start to share knowledge, but allow also telemedicine as a sort of free service for people that cannot actually afford to go to healthcare and have support. So it's a slow process. To make an online community takes a lot of time. We were recently part of an incubator in Berlin, which helped us to understand a bit the social business behind. But yeah, it's something that we are working on and that we hope in few years to be up. And at the same time, what we are doing is still running workshops locally with different communities to understand how it could look like. And from a more technological level, we are developing, oops, I went too far. We are back in the lab, and it's not anymore me alone at home growing bacteria, but we are actually at the University of Cambridge at the lab of Karna Rayan, developing sensors. In this case, specifically, we are developing a pH sensor and other sensor that will be integrated in the underwear that are able to monitor the vaginal fluid. Why pH, for example? pH is an indicator that can tell you if when a female has symptoms, if a specific infection is coming. And 2 years ago, we had like a European fund where we were able to actually develop the first prototype that are wearable, and where actually they work on a sort of lab situation. But that, again, if we talk about wearable technology, there's still a long way ahead. So if we don't have smart t-shirt already in the market, there is a reason. So thinking about a smart underwear is something that it will take still a bit of time. So hopefully not like future FLORA, that it looks like a future scenario, but much more like in a closer. And since I'm also an educator, I teach workshops from Royal College to Politecnico in Milano. I'm teaching like basic of Arduino coding, working with electronic textile sensor and DIY biotextiles. I thought, what if actually we can think even about a low technology in Alma? Like, what if we can make like a biodegradable pad that changes color with the pH? And then this biodegradable pad is at the same time made of agar-agar and colored with red cabbage, which is pH sensitive. So once I see that my vaginal fluid is changing color, it's probably matching some symptoms and probably matching some infections. So again, a kit that maybe everyone all over can just reproduce to reproduce their own product and then biodegrade it. So yes, in this future, I hope and I wish that women will be in charge of their own bodies, and that probably technology can be one of these tools, which especially is applied in a DIY approach. And thank you very much. You can find more in my own website or in the ALMA website. And thank you again.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Julia. Lots to really fascinating in all honesty. Guys, and please, if anyone's got any questions, and feel free to raise your hand, and or if you want to basically come off mute, by all means kind of do that. And does anybody have any questions at all? Either of our speakers. Just a quick question. Oh, I thought you were going to say something. And Julie, you kind of mentioned the fact that we haven't got smart t-shirts, so we're quite far off making smart underwear, basically. But do you kind of feel as if, like, I guess with the prototype that you've done, I guess with the intention of with the prototype is somehow hopefully to kind of advance it and take it forward, because the feeling that you have that you haven't got, it seems quite difficult. Is that come to an end, or are you still going to pursue to kind of actually try to get it out in the market, or just try and make it some sort of viable product in some way?
Sure. Well, the other half of ALMA, like the co-founders, the scientist part, are back in the lab now. They are doing a postdoc at the University of Cambridge to develop the sensor, not really in textile as we did two years ago, but back in a sort of polymer that can be applied as a small pad in every underwear, customizable, and maybe become a product. But what we are, I think, even more inspired and interested is to develop from one side an high tech, as it could be this sensor, which is what we think wearable technology should push towards, like well-being and healthcare, but at the same time still like try to merge with something low tech or DIY that can really be accessible and inclusive, because at the same time is there where we really want to make a difference.
Definitely. And Sitraka, just a quick question. I guess in terms of all your experience that you've had in terms of just creating things, in terms of like, what's been the biggest challenge in terms of trying to get people to understand, or just trying to, I guess, convey your message so people who aren't artistic or people who aren't necessarily involved can understand it and appreciate it?
I mean, within the scope of very, very far away, it's interesting because the main original point was to basically engage with the kind of public in general. So we've been running these co-inquiries or workshops like in China, in Europe, and in the United States, and try to get the most kind of diverse people with the most diverse sort of backgrounds, etc. And originally, the biggest challenge was not necessarily, I mean, there's two challenges, but the biggest challenge that we had was having people, to start with, having normal conversations between each other and being able to listen to each other in terms of during these co-inquiries. So we had lots of kind of confrontational situations, and it's actually, this is the reason why we ended up using space exploration as a lens, because as soon as like we were aiming at something that was seemingly very far away, suddenly things kind of like opened and people started to kind of listen to each other and be more kind of allow themselves to listen to the arguments from someone who may disagree with them, and etc. And actually this kind of became like merge with their own sort of like narrative or their own kind of perception of the exercise itself. And then the second biggest challenge is the problem of dissemination. So it's like kind of creating the bridge between these ideas that are created by people wants to participate to our co-inquiries or like collaborations that we create in very local specific areas, and basically being able to bring these ideas to a wider audience, or bring these ideas to places where there's like some power in terms of decision making processes. But this is why also we've been sort of like experimenting with very different ways of disseminating these stories, because not necessarily to generate more audiences, but also to tackle, like, to be able to you know, you don't know what's going to stick, basically. But I mean, to be honest, right now we're still sort of experimenting with different dissemination processes, because it's not as if there were like a particular solution that kind of solved everything. But I think the biggest, as you mentioned, the biggest challenge, I think, is to go beyond this sort of like art and design kind of circles, and have these kind of conversation become more of a kind of cultural fiction somehow. I mean, I don't know if it's very clear what I'm saying, but
Definitely. Thank you very much. And Julia, just got a question from Pauline, who asks, I had a little question. Have you tried to talk about your subject by using another aesthetic, a bit less linked to what we think femininity should be, or is it on purpose? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pauline. Let's say that when I started Future Flora, it was in purpose, because I was really coming from I was really coming also from the Gyne Punk Lab in Spain, like this group of like hackers. They work to stigmatize female bodies through the use of biohacking, and somehow I wanted to still bring a different type of femininity in this growing bacteria, in this object that you will never think also as a female you can actually do at home in growing bacteria. You will expect that it's a scientist that has to do it, or that is a doctor, usually a male doctor, to take care of you. But let's say that now with Alma, we are really working on this, especially also from a language point of view. Like, it took us a long time to show to our scientists that they had to use the word female instead of women. And now that we are also in a different place, even from an academic language with female, of course, we are talking about people. Even though when we talk about Alma, the first thing that we usually say, we talk about female or women as a woman, or a woman in trans, or woman with a trans experience. So we try as much to be inclusive from a design language as well. Like the underwear that you saw was one of the type that we developed, but then there are other 3 types that were more speaking to a wider language of people. But let's say it's still very difficult. Personally, also, it's very difficult to just be a gender, or to just really consider this topic a gender, because we are really talking about a history, like in this patriarchal society that has been really stigmatizing ever the female body. So somehow it has to go back there. But we are trying as much as possible to really stay up in time, and of course have this inclusive language in everything that will bring more acceptance for everyone. But it's a constant work on this. But thank you for the question.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Just cautious and of time, I was going to say, and just Sitraka, and then coming to you later on, Julia. Do you guys just want to share anything that you're currently working on? Any kind of plugs that you'd like to let the audience know at all, or the people that will be watching later on? Sitraka? Even if you just want to plug your socials, plug whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way would be to actually follow me on Instagram, because this is where I post most things. So it's at Sitraka ____.
Drop it in the chats.
Yeah.
Definitely. And Julie, what about yourself? Like, is there anything that you're working on at the moment, anything that you'd like to share? Where can people just find more about your work?
Definitely Instagram as well, but Twitter, I don't know. LinkedIn, I don't know. I'm sometimes I get overwhelmed by social media. Yes, I don't know. It depends how I feel in that moment. So, but reaching by email, it's like the best way to really ask me the question.
Yeah, Definitely. And on that note, I just want to give both of you a really massive thank you. So everyone, please join me in giving both Julia and Sitraka a massive virtual round of applause. And just want to kind of just say thanks to everyone that kind of came along. And just a final reminder that all the amazing opportunities at Tour de Moon in terms of the grants and funding are all available. I'm going to put it in the chat group. And so there you go, the website's tourdemoon.com/apply. And if anyone's got any questions about any of the funding, please get in touch with hello@tourdemoon.com. On that note, thank you very much and have a lovely day.